Loot generation is a major aspect behind many ARPGs and just RPG design in general. Well, for today's critical thought, I want to talk a little bit about the differences between good and bad loot generation, and why games like Borderlands and Diablo don't quite interest me as much as something like Gunfire Reborn. The act of loot generation has been a cornerstone of games for a very long time. It's a major aspect behind some of the pros of procedural generation. The original Diablo and Diablo 2 have certainly coined this whole idea that an enemy can drop, well, anything. A sword that does lightning damage, hats that can summon minions, magic super pants, and so on and so forth. But this is an area where we see this idea of full chaos or completely untethered rules to loot generation doesn't quite make things as interesting as you would think. So let's start with Diablo 3. Diablo 3's original launch was met with a lot of issues and problems with the design. The first one, or one of the biggest ones, was how loot was defined. They very much went with a anything goes kind of style. Hey, this dexterity bow meant for demon hunters. We're going to give it plus intelligence, and we'll give 10 bonus points to the sorcerer skill tree. And that helps you exactly negative 40 on your character. Not only that, but the spectrum or the scale of stat distribution was so high. It was kind of like a weapon could roll stats that could mean it could be like a level 20, or it could go as high as like a level 30, level 35. The difference between weapons in terms of their scaling at full level, which at that time was 60, was huge. It was like, okay, this weapon could have a stat of 1,000 damage. It could have 10,542 damage, or anything in between. And what was the chance for you that you were going to get that super high roll? See, one of the basic rules of loot generation is that there needs to be some control element. And this was kind of where Blizzard went with this idea of kind of like a smart loot system with Diablo 3 patch 1.04. They basically said, well, if a weapon for a barbarian drops, or a barbarian type weapon, maybe it should have something that's related to barbarians. Because what's the chance of a sorcerer or a necromancer wielding a giant two-handed barbarian axe? And this is one of the first lessons you have to understand, that you want to have some element of control. There has to be something that gives these weapons a general utility. If I'm going to drop an ice wand, I don't want plus to fire damage, or vice versa. Now, another example when things get too out of control is with Borderlands, or any of the Borderlands games. Billed as role-playing shooters, one of the major marketing points was a bajillion, zillion, quadrillion guns. And they certainly kept that promise. Every weapon in the game is categorized by the type of weapon, shotgun, sniper, pistol, machine gun, and so on, and then the weapon manufacturer, and I do not remember the names of any of them. And what ended up happening was there were so many weapons being dropped in the world of Borderlands, 90 to 95% of them were just useless. Hey, this is a shotgun with a sniper scope, but it still has the maximum range of a shotgun. This pistol is super rapid firing, but the accuracy is so horrible, it's like you pull the trigger and it goes all over the place. How many times when you play Borderlands did you kill a boss or an elite and just drop like 5 different weapons, all the same type? Maybe one would be something you would actually use. And this is where, again, you want to be very mindful of what is the intended utility of these weapons or the stuff that you're dropping. If I'm dropping, I don't know, super heavy armor pants in a RPG, super, very high weight class, plus 2%, DPS, or increased speed, doesn't matter if I'm having, negative 60 speed because I'm wearing very heavy pants. And you want to have these elements of control. A shotgun that has a scope like a sniper rifle, but has nothing else associated to that, it's a worthless modifier. Just as trying to put, fire damage on an ice weapon if they cancel each other out. As I said in the previous example, look for commonalities. If I'm building a super duper sledgehammer, what would go well with that sledgehammer? This is one of the things that Path of Exile did really well, and I would say between Path of Exile and Gunfire are some of my favorite kinds of loot generation. In Path of Exile, what they did was they tied loot generation specifically to builds and stats. You, of course, have your three primary stats. I think it's Strength, Intelligence, and I want to say Dexterity. Again, it's been a while since I played PoE. All the gear drops in the game are centered around either being one primary stat or a combination of two. So, Strength, Dexterity, Strength, Intelligence, Intelligence, Dexterity, you get the picture. And then what they did even further was for every weapon type, it came with a unique modifier that would be associated with that weapon. Claws had natural lifesteal. Clubs, I believe, had greater or inherent stun chance. Daggers bleed. Wands increase, I believe, your magic shield or they increase your magic damage. The idea was that it was very easy in Path of Exile to know what gear to look for. If I'm building an intelligence, strength, life-stealing wizard or witch in Path of Exile, well, I just came with my entire laundry list of what I'm looking for. And as a side note, Grim Dawn, when they implemented the loot filter option, I think is another really great feature for loot-driven games. If I'm, again, building a dual-wielding gun, ice-based character, well, let me check that off on my filter so that if the item drops, I know it's something that's good for me. You do not want to run into a situation where it's like, I kill an enemy, 65 swords, shields, and bows drop, figure out which one you want to use. The act of picking loot or figure out what equipment to wear should be as streamlined and as easy to do as possible. Like I said, you can only wear one set or if you swap 2 sets of clothes at a time. I shouldn't have to stop for 5 minutes every time I kill an enemy to figure out, does this shirt give me 0.65324.7% more attack speed? What's the better option? And make sure if you do have a, optimal or best equipment filter or auto equip, make sure that works right. You don't want the player to be equipping the wrong thing. So, with that said, one of the things I liked about with Gunfire Reborn is that it's very streamlined, but it's very intelligent in terms of how they settle on their modifiers or their fixes. So, every weapon in the game is a known quantity. One illusion is going to work the same as 10,342 other illusions. Cavalry the same, so on and so on. The modifiers are both very specific and also kind of wide, depending upon which ones you get. Plus accuracy and stability works great on any weapon, but you're not going to get that on a melee-driven weapon. Likewise, if a weapon already comes innately with doing fire damage, or if it's supposed to innately come with fire damage, it's going to start with the affix, this weapon does fire damage, this weapon does lightning damage, and so on and so forth. The exclusive modifiers or exclusive affixes are unique to that weapon, and they're designed to push what makes that weapon work even further. When I get like +3 bullets on my illusion, I know I'm in for a really good time. And this takes me again to what makes really good loot generation work. When a weapon drops in Gunfire, I know immediately, okay, what does this weapon do? What is it going to help or hurt me with my utility or build? And then the X factor of that is what modifiers it has, or even how many. Sometimes it doesn't even matter which modifiers or affixes it has, because as the people who are playing Gunfire with me know, maybe you can go to a peculiar chest and re-roll all of them into something better. And there's, again, you have the basic, you have kind of, I forget the exact name, we'll just call them elite modifiers, you have exclusives, and then you have the Geminis. And they're all designed to make the weapon better and push it again either to a higher tier or in a unique direction. If I get, fire bullets on my illusion, well, now I have a super rapid fire shotgun. And it's all about making this search for loot meaningful and making it so that there's not as many bad choices. I use air quotes there because we can always figure out unique ways of making use of weapons, skills, perks, and all that. So for the final point, I want to kind of add on to what I just said with Gunfire. If you want to make loot generation and modifiers interesting, you want to design them so that A, they are always good in their respective ways, and B, they should not step on the toes of anything else. So it's time for a little game design lesson. I'm going to describe for you 3 passives that could appear on a weapon or a piece of gear. I want you to figure out which one would be the best of the 3. Let me know in the comments. Number 1. Recover 1 health every minute. Okay. Number 2. Recovers 20 health every 3 minutes. And then number 3. Recovers 20% of your health every second while this piece of gear is equipped. I think it's pretty safe to say which one is the best of the 3. You do not want to have, again, modifiers that are inherently competing with each other, because it makes a player automatically discount the weaker options. If I had to choose between 2 weapons or 2 perks, and that first one is the one that's on there, that's a dead choice, because I already know that there's 2 better options out there. And inherently, I know there's one best option. What you want to do with loot generation and modifiers is come up with interesting ways that each apply a specific use or utility. They should all be objectively good, but subjectively, it will be a lot harder to figure out which one is the best for you at a current moment. So let's do this a little lesson again. Modifier number 1. And let's say this is for an ice weapon or ice class type of weapon. Enemy is slowed by 30% with a, let's say, a 45% chance of proccing. When enemy is frozen, all debuff damage and effects are tripled. 10%, no, actually, let me rephrase that. I gave you a better one. When enemy's health drops below 15%, enemy is instantly killed. 8% when it comes to bosses. So, of those 3, all 3 of those sound really good. They're all unique, but the de facto best one is going to be different based on what build you're going for. Let's say I'm going for a slowdown strat. Let's say I have another weapon or skill that when an enemy is slowed, this whole laundry list of debuffs go with it. Well, that would make that first option the best. Or, let's say we are going for our own debuffs. Let's say we have poison and bleed, or we're in a party and we have a poison wizard and a bleed warrior. If I can triple the effect of their debuffs on this enemy, that makes me a really good team player. And then that third one, well, for that, let's say I'm doing a single player run and it's just me trying to do damage. Well, guaranteed deaths on 15 and 8%, that sounds really good, doesn't it? So, again, the point is that all 3 of those modifiers are great. You would want any of those on your weapon or armor or whatever. But when they are the best, it's going to be highly subjective. And if you have super duper ultra mega alpha gear, maybe you could put 2 or 3 of those modifiers on. In Gunfire, there are rare cases where you will get multiple exclusive affixes on a single weapon, and that's when the good times roll. So to wrap things up for our critical thought, loot generation and loot table design is very tricky to do. It's a lot harder than you may think. Again, 100% chaos doesn't work, especially when you're building your progression off of that. If I need, something to survive this level, and all I'm finding are, let's say, 5-point daggers or 30-point guns when enemies have 30,000 health, I'm kind of screwed. And there will always be people who get lucky. For everyone who has trouble, trust me, there's going to be someone else who says, I killed a common enemy, I got this ultra rare shotgun that does lightning, fire, frost, heals me, does all kinds of damage, orders me pizza whenever I want, so get good. Why can't you just get lucky like that? You want your loot to always have some element of utility. Look for controlled elements. Things that you want to make sure that are going to be applied to this weapon. If I'm using a bow, plus 50% damage and melee range doesn't quite make sense. Likewise, a scope on my battle axe doesn't help either. And try to come up with modifiers that, again, they're all really great, but figuring out which one is the best at any one time is highly difficult. Because that's how you can start to come up with interesting builds and strategies around your game. Like we've said before when we talked about roguelike and the RNG of games, if you can get that Island Misfit Toys kind of analogy where this weird sword and this crazy modifier on this cap combined with this unusual perk on my sneakers, and suddenly I just break the entire game, it's going to make your game more interesting and more engaging to play compared to if you don't get exactly this, and this, you're never going to win. So what are your favorite examples of loot generation in games? Can you think of games that did this right, more other than the ones that I mentioned here? Let me know in the comments down below. Do the liking, subscribing, and commenting. If you're interested in my thoughts on design, check out my game design books. And come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where you some the art and science of games.